Hello, my name is J.A. Süss, and I am your moderator tonight for the First Fridays Art Talk. Welcome to the First Fridays Art Talk. I'll start off by thanking our sponsors. I'd like to thank the Winnipeg Arts Council and the Manitoba Arts Council and the Winnipeg Free Press, as well as First Fridays in the Exchange for organizing this talk and having it. So our talk today is called Updating the Frame as Art. All of our talks this year, with the exception of one, have been called like something as art. So that is why our title follows that format, Updating the Frame as Art. And it is a deep dive into creating respectful descriptions for BIPoC art from the Winnipeg Craft Museum and Library. And our two guests today are Neda Masoomifar and Andrea Reichert. I'll do more of a description right now. So when Neda Masoomifar took a deep dive into the Manitoba Craft Museum and Library to research, document, and photographs objects made by BIPoC makers, she didn't expect to be moved by the familiarity of many of the pieces from Asian, North African, and Middle Eastern countries. So with the help and direction from Andrea Reichert, curator at the Manitoba Craft Museum and Library, Masoomifar surfaced with an exhibition influenced by sociology and personal experiences with art and art history mentors. So today we're going to talk about matters about the exhibition, which is called History Revised. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about Neda. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about Andrea. So Neda Masoomifar is a second-generation Iranian immigrant who currently resides on Treaty 1 territory. She is currently studying to receive her honors in sociology at the University of Winnipeg. And many of her interests expand across many mediums and topics, some of which include art history in the Middle East and North Africa, making earrings, specifically culturally inspired earrings, film photography, and more recently, she has explored interests in printmaking. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Manitoba Craft Museum and Library, which is Canada's only museum of craft. It is dedicated to preserving heritage and teaching the student, inspiring the artist, and promoting a way of life that values the handmade. The Manitoba Crafts Museum and Library has its origins in the early years of the Craft Guild of Manitoba, which was formed in 1928. And in 1933, that group established a permanent collection and library. Over the years, volunteers worked to develop the collection, create exhibits, establish and deliver programming, and to care for the collection according to museum standards. The Guild also established a library of craft publications and patterns for use in workshops and by craftspeople. The library grew steadily over the years, and in 1948 was named the Gladys Chown Memorial Library. In 1997, the Crafts Guild of Manitoba closed its doors, but the two collections were kept together and are managed by the Crafts Museum and Library, an independent organization. And Andrea Reichert, one of our guests, is the curator of the Craft Museum and Library. So I'd like to now welcome our two guests, Neda Masoomifar and Andrea Reichert. Good evening.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
So I'm gonna throw this first question to Neda, and I'm wondering if you can just give me a tiny little description of History Revised and your project at the MCML. And then I'm going to ask Andrea to describe the same thing. So I would like to get Neda, your perspective, and then Andrea's perspective.
Yeah, so I was initially hired back in June of 2021. I was hired specifically through MCML for the project that I was hired for, which is to revise and re-enter and edit and research and rephotograph all of the BIPoC pieces in the collection, which originally hadn't always had, there's never been like a specific focus on just the BIPoC pieces. So that's really special. And it was actually my first time going into the art sector professionally, and it's been a lot of fun. And for my final project, I essentially curated the show with the help of Andrea. And I chose all of the pieces that I really enjoyed researching. I mean, obviously I enjoyed researching all of them, but the ones that, for one, had the most information as well, since it can be quite difficult to do research on a lot of these pieces, since when they were received, it was years ago. It was almost like 90 years ago, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And yeah, so it's kind of hard to like gather and have enough information about all the pieces, since if we weren't given all of that initial information, like its place of origin and stuff like that. So yeah.
And how about you, Andrea? How would you describe this project?
Well, this is one of many collections projects that we've done over the years. Museums occupy a unique segment of the arts community because we have collections that we are managing and have stewardship for. And so we're responsible for the care of the collection. And I think the last several years have been really transformative in terms of the attention and awareness of BIPoC concerns, and talking about reconciliation and decolonizing, and all of those things that are happening, not just in museums, but more broadly in society. And from a museum perspective, we are responsible to our collection first. And so this project was planned probably 2 years ago, maybe not quite, but you know, it takes a while to gather the funding together. And so our goal with this project was to focus our attention on the items in our collection that were made by BIPoC artists. And there's about 400 or so. And to really just spend the time and do research and make sure that the information in our database is as accurate as possible. So for some things, it's very simple. It's measuring them or making sure that the materials are included in there. And for some of the research, it's a lot harder because we don't necessarily know the makers, but to try and research as much as we can so that we can talk about them, represent them in the exhibits, on social media, in every way, in an accurate manner. And so that was the first part of the project, was to do the research, but there were some sharing opportunities as well, because the other part of museums is that we share what we have in our collection. And so the exhibit was the most significant part of the sharing in terms of, you know, having a public presentation of some of the pieces. And so Neda was the lead on the exhibit, and it's a wonderful show. So that's my take on the history of the project.
It sure is a wonderful show. It was really beautiful. I want to talk about that a little bit, but first I'm gonna admit I forgot to do the land acknowledgement. So I'd like to cut back and do the land acknowledgement. So I prepared a little slide. So if people want to read along, they're welcome to do so. So First Fridays, the organization was started in order to encourage people to come to the Exchange District in Winnipeg. And we acknowledge that the Exchange District is located within Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Nahiawewak, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge that our water comes from Treaty 3 territory, and much of our hydroelectric power comes from Treaty 5 territory. We'd like to work together towards greater understanding and acting on how to decolonize art, artistic practice, and public discourse. Thanks for that slide. Just getting back into the exhibit, I'm wondering if there were like any sociological principles that you are kind of working from, or any specific lenses that you were making sure that you looked at the work from Neda as you were doing your deep dive, or even as you're curating?
Yeah, I think just studying sociology has, like the way it presents itself in what I curated and how I engage with art isn't as theoretical, and I don't use as many like strict frameworks. It's rather all of the time and years I've spent studying it, how that applies and how I use it in honestly everyday life. So what I mean by that is like studying sociology, something that most sociologists and students of sociology develop is a great sense of like engaging critically with things, since that's literally the entire theory is just questioning everything, just being skeptical of everything, which can be good. But I also acknowledge that like sociology does have a lot of roots and uses a lot of frameworks. And there are a lot of theorists who base their work subconsciously off of like white supremacy and white supremacist modes of thinking. So I'm still like very critical of that, but I think the ways in which it presents itself with this specific project was there are so many Indigenous pieces that I had to engage with, and I'm not Indigenous. And so it was very important for me to be cognizant of my standing and my role as a settler. And as we'll see, and I'm sure we'll talk about later on, but there is one piece in which that was critical for. But essentially, I guess one very popular sociological framework is intersectionality, which is something I always take into consideration when doing anything, but especially when engaging with art and art that is made by other cultures who face different forms of systemic oppression than I do. So yeah, I guess that's the ways in which I use sociology.
Great. I was also thinking about one of the ways where you talked about how you arrange the pieces in the case, which was it's an instinct after you spend all this time with all these pieces and doing so much research. It's hard to make a selection, and essentially space constraints usually cause you to deselect some pieces rather than like, oh, I guess I'll have that one too. It's more like, oh no, I can't have that one. So can you talk about like the approach of like not just like from sort of like an attachment idea, like being attached to the pieces, but also the idea of like how much you wanted to like how you wanted to include things, and how that relates to aesthetics.
Yeah, so originally Andrea told me to select about 20 things, and I did. I think I chose like 21 or so. And as Andrea was helping me to hang everything up, I was like, you know what? Like, I talk about my distaste for minimalism so much and how I love reclaiming my Oriental background by utilizing maximalism. Because I guess if people aren't aware, minimalism is, I guess, a way of life, a lifestyle that was kind of born out of white supremacy. Again, I'm going to be using that word a lot. So it was born in response to maximalism, and maximalism, as defined, is commonly found in countries such as like most BIPoC countries in like the Middle East, North Africa, other places in Africa, a lot of Asian countries. And yeah, so once we started putting stuff up, I was like, wait, Andrea, like, what do you think of this piece? Like, what do you think if I put it here? And I just squish everything together. And Andrea's amazing. So Andrea was like, yeah, go ahead, whatever you want. I'm like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. So like I ended up selecting even more. I'd say like about 5 or maybe more pieces that we didn't originally intend on putting up. So kind of just tried to utilize the space as much as possible. And I would have put even more things if that was possible, but there quite literally was no more room. And if I were to like position them in even higher, like issues such as like it not being completely visible to viewers, and because we have little descriptors of the pieces, and not being able to read that, those are the reasons why there weren't even more stuff. But I kind of wanted to take a maximalist-ish approach, and I wanted it to be very vibrant and colorful, and yeah, just make that little part of the gallery really stand out. So yeah.
So for people who haven't been to the gallery, Andrea, can you describe like the size of the gallery and what kind of space we're working with here? Not we, me.
Sure. Just the space that this exhibit is in, or the whole facility?
Maybe the space that this.
Okay. All right. Okay, so this exhibit is in the space that we call the Heritage Gallery, and it's a small hallway size gallery. It's about 16 feet long, and it has a display case along one side with big glass. It's nice and high as well, right up to the 12-foot ceilings. And the other side is just a flat wall, so we can hang things on it. So it's not a very big space, but you can actually fit quite a few pieces in. There's 29, in case you're wondering, Neda. I took a look today. So yeah, so that space is always for exhibits that are generated by the museum. We share the space here, the C2 Center for Craft, with the Manitoba Craft Council. So there's a second gallery space that has exhibits that rotate between our organization, the Manitoba Crafts Museum and Library, and the Craft Council. But this one is always for more historical exhibits.
So perhaps now is a good time to talk about the pieces. And I know the first one that we're going to talk about is a piece that was hanging on the wall. Actually, the first 2 pieces are hanging on the wall. So this piece is about, I'm going to just say about, like we're about 1.5 meters-ish wide. And maybe it's 30, 40 centimeters tall, 50, 30. 40, I'm not sure. I didn't think it was important to write down the exact number, so that's why I'm sorry about that. So can you tell me about what your work was in researching this, Neda?
Yeah, so that was one of the first pieces I researched. Since researching and working in museum collections was very new for me, Andrea suggested that I start with like a specific region. So I started in Asia, and this was, in Asia, but I noticed this, I saw it while Andrea was just showing me random pieces, and it caught my eye because it's very familiar. It looks familiar to me in that of the design, and not that I like grew up having one in my home, but since I am Iranian, we do have similar kind of embroideries. So it caught my eye. But it was listed as being from Egypt. And to me that, I thought it was a little weird because for one, and just because it didn't seem like it was very Egyptian culturally, like the person might have bought it in Egypt, but it could have been a culturally like Afghani or Baluch person who made it. So, but that was what was written in the original records. So the reason why I questioned this was because you can see there are mirrors embroidered in. That's called shisha embroidery, which literally translates to mirror embroidery. And that's done by weaving tiny shards of mirrors into typically like, just woven pieces. And this practice originated in India from poorer people as a means to replicate what more rich people were wearing, so more flashy clothing. And since people did not have means, they started putting mirrors into their clothing. And this is something that has become very popularized specifically around that region. So countries such as Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, those would be regions in which they practice that very commonly. And as well as the use of colors, I could be wrong, but based off of what Andrea advised me and what I researched, this was likely naturally dyed. And you have to think of like where this kind of color and pigment is most commonly used and the reasons why, because colors are so significant, whether that be for symbolism or due to the resources and environment in which like a country has. So I was kind of thinking like more around India and like the Middle East and West Asian, Central Asian countries. But I have an auntie who studied like art history and I think fine arts in Iran. And she's very, she knows so much about woven craft. So I reached out to her and she also advised that this was likely originated in Afghanistan or a Baluch region. Baluchistan is like a province. It's not a distinct country or anything, but Baluch people are an ethnic group who live in Iran, Afghanistan, and like India. So yeah, I do not think it was culturally Egyptian, but again, like I could always be completely wrong, but yeah, I hope I'm not.
And does this piece like have a backing, or is it just are the mirrors like just sewn kind of on top in the front, or?
Yeah, they're sewn on top. And this piece actually isn't the one that, sorry, this one is, but the one I wanted to select to hang on the wall has, it's a different version. It's very similar. It's hard to describe. But once I started researching this and then later on, I found another piece that had the exact same, it looked the exact same as this, except in addition to what we're seeing on the screen right now, it had a longer like silk attachment to it. Because if you can see, it's not sewn in on the sides, like it's unhemmed. For me, that indicated that, and also it was mentioned that it was listed as a table runner initially. And I was like, there's like no way, like considering the way in which the designs are placed, as well as like the fact that it's not hemmed. So when I found that piece later on, they were entered in at different times in the history of the crafts museum. So that's why they weren't attached and they weren't linked together in the database. So when I found them, I was like, wait, that's quite literally the same piece.
It's like a twin.
This one's a complete version of it. So that was really exciting. Yeah, and that's what it looks like. I was going to hang that, but that was too delicate. So what we have on the wall now is the lower half of it.
So
yeah,
the lengthy silk part is like, the whole thing is like, I don't know, it's 7-8 feet long or something.
It's very long, even more, I don't know.
And so it's quite deteriorated. Andrea, do you want to talk about the limitations of getting that onto the wall?
Well, I know Neda really wanted to display this one, and honestly, I did too. But when you look at pieces, you have to look at what the condition of them is, and can you display them safely so they're not deteriorating because they're on exhibit. And so the top part is silk, and it's a very lightweight silk. And then if with more time and resources, we probably could have figured something out, but it didn't seem feasible. And so because the heavy part that we looked at before, the bottom part is linen and quite heavy. So you have a heavy thing hanging on something that's much more flimsy. And so then it has the weight. And you can see on the screen I just flipped, but there was little tiny rings that have been sewn to hold it up. So yeah, there it is. So you can already see in that photo that there's a little hole that's been formed there. So silk is very sturdy, but it can also be very fragile. And so yeah, just after however many years it just didn't seem like it was a good idea to be hanging that. So we opted to display the other piece, which doesn't have the silk at the top, but otherwise is pretty much exactly the same.
Very cool. So on another piece that we were that is also on that back wall is this square piece. It's like square, and then the outer square is black. The inner square is kind of gold. Then inside there is another much more intricate gold embroidering, and there's a black circle in the middle with another fancy gold circle inside that. And this one is about 80 centimeters square-ish. I'm using my physics caliper skills from long ago. So, Neda, what made you select this piece?
For one, it is stunning. Another reason why is because I think it again embodied the very maximalist, flashy, like gold. I mean, I don't think flashy is the best term, but yeah, I chose this again with this one. Well, the image that is showing right here is like a specific, it looks like exactly the same as the one, as the piece in the collection, but it's an excerpt from a book. It's just one page. And it talks about how, like in the book, it states that this style of embroidery originates in the Goa region in India, which is a coastal, I think west coastal like region in India. And the Goa like province has a lot of art, has a lot of influence from Portuguese presence. So that was very interesting. But what was originally written in the records about this was that it was made by a group of specifically like Muslim women in India, which I thought was interesting because I've never heard, and the research that I did, it was quite weird to generalize and to say that it was specifically from that, since like my research, like I want to find out, like even if it was made by a group of like Muslim women, I want to know the history of this artistic choice. So this can be found very, very commonly in countries such as Turkey, Iran, again, a lot of like West Asian countries. And in fact, when I took my grandmother to see this in person the other day, she looked at it and it was immediately very familiar to her. She just like, yeah, I've definitely seen something like that in Iran, or I've had something like that. But you could tell that this was definitely made for somebody who is very wealthy, or a wealthy person purchased it due to the gold work embroidery. And as well as the fact that it's just very, very intricate, and it's quite large for such an intricate piece. But it's beautiful. People would typically use this for special occasions. They would bring it out. It could be used to part of a dowry, I guess, when like a woman gets married, or when people get married. But yeah, it's stunning, and people would bring it out. I'm just based off of my own cultural knowledge, like this would be brought out for special occasions if you're having like a nice little family gathering or family friends coming over, or if you're going, I don't know, I don't think there's a word for it in English, but categorization, which is formal arrangement to meet a family prior to agreeing upon an engagement amongst the two. So all family members show up and are part of the discussion and engagement for that. And so an occasion like that, this would be brought out. But yeah,
It's a very special, I don't know, I want to call it a tapestry, but
Yeah.
I know that in the PDF research, which is the where the Goa information is, that it said that some works that are of this tradition had like shiny beetle wings sewn into it, but this appears to be gold instead of beetle wings. Do you want to speak to that at all, Andrea?
We do have a piece in the collection that has the beetle wings in it, but a lot of work from this area uses a technique called couching, where there's the design is something that sits on top of the fabric. So whether it's beetle wings, or in this case, it's like a fine flossy kind of material, and then you take a second thread and you sew that on the top, and so you can make interesting designs using both the background material, whether it's beetle wings or whatever, and then the thread on top. So it's very common to see that type of work in that era. I just wanted to mention one other thing about sort of commenting on what Neda was saying about how originally the information in the database said something, and then we were learning more about it. And so it's really quite common in museums to have some misinformation in the database, because you get donations from people and they say, this is a such and such. And so you get the history of what they tell you it is. But that's not always what it really is. You know, the information that comes with it is often not 100%. And so that's why projects like this are so important, where you look at what the information that comes with it, but then you investigate to see, is that really what it is? And so, I mean, that happens with all sorts of pieces. Family history gets warped and changed, and the same for pieces that get, picked up like this and brought into museum collections. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that a little bit.
Well, speaking of couching, I'd like to move to our next fabric object, which, oh no, this isn't couching, but this is our next fabric object. Thank you. So this is, I call this the mulberry bark, because Neda told me that it was made of mulberry bark. So, but that is not what it is called. Neda, will you talk a little bit about this piece? Maybe describe it too.
Definitely. So yeah, as you can see right here, it is like a mahogany kind of color and paint that they use. And there's a lot of geometric design and a lot of use of triangles and diamonds in the design. But this essentially, it originates from Fiji. And we know that this one, in fact, is from Fiji because the records are a lot more clear. But this was purchased in, I believe, 1971 by a family that went and visited in Fiji. But yeah, this in a lot of Polynesian countries, this is very commonly practiced, is making either traditional clothing, sometimes mosquito nets, wall hangings, decorations, like touristy stuff. From mulberry bark. And how this is done is you take the bark and you soak it for a really long time, and you pound it out to your desired texture. If it's like, mosquito net, you want it to be a lot thinner, obviously. But this one's just a wall hanging. And in most Polynesian countries, this is referred to as tapa cloth. But in Fiji, this is referred to as masikesa, which literally translates to mulberry bark. Yeah, and it's really cool. And yeah, unfortunately, the practice is dying down a little bit. So there are Indigenous people, specifically in Hawaii, that I found during my research, who are trying really hard to preserve this artistic practice and pass it along, because it is very special. And for a lot, it is a spiritual practice as well. The process of harvesting and soaking and pounding it with rocks is very important and has been a very integral part of so many Indigenous cultures in that region. So yeah.
It's a way of combining beauty and survival together, which and certainly belongs in the category of things handmade as a valuable object. All right, well, let's speed right along to our next item, which is an artistic object that is also made for use. So I would describe this as a beaded bag. It's got two sort of anemone, daisy. I don't know if there are any botanists around who may correct me for calling that a daisy. It certainly has a wider middle, but it's a lot of beads on a suede colored bag. Can you talk a little bit about how this needed more categorization? Sorry, that's not the word. Classification, that's not the word either. You needed more clarification, you needed more information about this piece.
Yeah, so this is actually a piece that I didn't research at all. Andrea brought in or hired somebody to research specifically all of the Indigenous pieces as much as they could, since Andrea felt that it was important to do so, to have the right respect for these pieces, since so much of Indigenous art and history is not documented and neglected and erased. It is really hard to research it in books and on the internet. So a lot of Indigenous history and even Indigenous fables are passed down from word of mouth. So so many of the people who do, it's important to hire and pay homage to these pieces in the most respectful way. But I can tell you a little bit about it. What the researcher found is still not a lot of information, which is unfortunate, but it's the best that could be done. This was made, we believe that it was made sometime in the 20th century, that it was made by Stoney Nakoda and Plains peoples. And this was made using smoke tanned hide and glass beads. The inside is also lined with a nice cotton fabric. So it's really well done. But yeah, that's what you know.
Great. Let's look at our next object, which takes up a lot of real estate in the glass case. So I see a purple robe, and if I was gonna place it, I'd place it from China, but I am not the expert. What did you, as the student expert, find out about this piece?
Well, for one, that is very nice of you to call me an expert, because I am not by any means, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. But this one was very, very, very exciting for me to uncover. Not that it was me who uncovered it, but when I first saw it, it was very, very exciting to be able to be in its presence, because in the past, there has been other researchers who have been hired, and this researcher found, and it's likely true, that this was worn by one of the last reigning, lower ranking, or fifth or sixth ranking emperors in China for the Qing dynasty, which was the last reigning dynasty in China. The dynasty fell in 1912. But yeah, these jackets, they're called dragon robes. I believe they're formally called as jifu in Mandarin. But these have a lot of symbolism. As so much of Chinese embroidery and craft, it is incredibly detailed, immaculate beautiful. I don't know if you can tell, but I absolutely love Chinese embroidery. But so the colors would indicate what ranking you are, as well as the use of dragons and how many claws they have. And as you can see, the clouds. And I'm not sure if there are phoenixes on there, but that's also a very common thing to use in Chinese art in general for symbolism. But yeah, it's beautiful, it's stunning, and I was like in awe to be able to be in the presence of something that was very likely one of the last reigning emperor's robes. But as you can see, this one does have a lot of wear, and the reason why that may be is due to the fact that, well, for one, the reason why the last reigning dynasty fell was due to a lack of money and means. So I believe this was one of the first dynasties in China's history to rewear and pass down clothing. So I believe, and I think the previous researcher also commented on this, that this was likely worn by multiple emperors and was passed down due to the lack of funds and means in the dynasty. So yeah.
Awesome. So let's also look at the next sort of garment piece, which Andrea was so kind as to give me a magnifying glass to look at. And so this is, I'm not sure how to describe this really in terms of like how this was on a garment. Would one of you want to take a stab at that?
I can, unless Andrea wants to. I feel like I'm talking so much. But
go ahead, Neda.
Okay. But basically, this was when it was first received. It was, and for up until we started working on this project. They were framed, so they were sewn, and thankfully they were delicately sewn onto another piece of silk, and they were framed. And I say thankfully because there have been some pieces that have been donated in the past where some people will literally glue these gorgeous like embroidery pieces to like cardboard or pieces of wood, and you can't take it out, or they frame it in a way that just it ruins it. And like obviously they weren't thinking about preservation when they were selling this, so this was likely sold, and this was, I don't know how it would have been acquired, but it was purchased by one of somebody who donated a lot of stuff in the past to MCML, Edna Sutherland. She, I believe, donated a lot of the stunning pieces from China. And so clearly she was like an affluent woman, so it wouldn't surprise me if this also originated from a member of the Qing dynasty, just due to the fact that this has such immaculate, and I mean immaculate, detail to this. This is over 100 years old at the minimum, and it has very little discoloration. It is not really frayed. It is in such good condition. And if you look like at the back of it, you can also tell that it was just done by somebody who's an amazing craftsperson. But yeah, so we think that the circular object, or no, not we think, but it likely is, it's from one piece of a cuff. And this would have been from, just based off of my research, it was really hard to find things about this, because I think a lot of the stuff from the Qing dynasty were distributed very low key once they fell. So there isn't enough, as much formal information about these garments from that era. But yeah, so that likely would have been from one of the cuffs, and then this one would have been from the opening. It would have been laid like that on a short
along the front.
Along the front, and it would
down on the side or over the shoulder?
No, on the front. So like you see, like I have a jacket right here. It would have like the pointy part would have been like that, and then like that along there, and it would have been for a short informal robe for a woman, so an empress. But yeah, like when I was researching other examples of short informal robes from the Qing dynasty and previous dynasties as well, it was even then, like looking at other big museums across the country who have these images of other formal wear from the Qing dynasty in their collections, I was not able to find anything nearly as detailed and beautiful as this. They're all beautiful, but like nothing as incredible as this. And it really is such a delight to be able to look at it in person, especially with like a little magnifying glass and with good lighting, because there's so much dimension to these faces, and they are smaller than like your fingernail. It's very small. And the fact that they were able to do shading, and you can see like the detailing in the pants for this is just insane.
It really is.
Really hyped up when I talk about this. I really like it. But
Well,
yeah.
when Andrea lent me the magnifying glass, just looking at the other pair of pants, there's what it is looks like is like a tiny piece of gold hammered out flat, wrapped around other threads that were likely made by hand, sewn onto this immaculate fabric where the thread is so teeny, and sewn on with another piece of thread. So it's just like each, square millimeter of this piece, it represents so much labor, and so it's so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's made with silk, which is, I believe, not a very easy type of thread to use to embroider. But Andrea knows a lot more about like the technical difficulties that would have been present when creating a piece such as this. But yeah,
It's
I
so
don't know.
incredible. I think I just encourage everyone to go and see it yourself. I'm just looking at our clock, and I really think there are some important pieces coming up that we just need to spend a bit of time on. So Erin, could we go to the next object? So when I look at this object, I know it's about the size of one of my banister rails in my old wooden dwelling. And so can you just, but it is called a house post. Can you describe this object, what it looks like, and some things about the research?
Yeah, I'm not the best at describing, but I'll do my best. This is pretty short. So it's a totem pole. It is a model, so it is smaller. It is all handmade, obviously. At the top of it, there is a bird-like figure that is mostly white, and the majority of the colors that you see present are a lot of black, yellow, red, cream, dark blue, green, and a little bit of blue. But this was probably one of the more like important pieces that I came across and researched. And I would like to just give a trigger warning for any Indigenous viewers, since we are going to be talking about like Indigenous trauma and history. So this piece, I came across it and I looked at the original records, and it said that it was made by 14-year-old John Cooper. This was likely an assigned name because John Cooper attended, and this is from the original records, that it said he attended Arctic Fox Indian Day School. This is what it was called. This is not me referring to Indigenous people with that word. But so this immediately caught my attention, and I wanted to provide more information, and if anything, to maybe even find John Cooper and connect with him in some way, because this wasn't donated too long ago. I believe it was donated. Let me just double check. I don't want to give the wrong dates, but Early mid 20th century to early 20th century, which isn't too long ago. So there would have been a high likelihood that he's still alive. But when I was researching Arctic Fox Indian Day School, nothing was coming up. I looked at official records of all of the day schools and residential schools that existed in Canada's history. Nothing came up. So I brought it out in person and I looked at it again. And if you can see on the bottom right there, there's a small little sticker there. It's very, very worn, but I spent about like 25 or so minutes just using various magnifying glasses and writing down all the words that I could distinguish and whatnot. And I found that it was actually John Cooper attended, and this was made, and what it says on the label is Tsarlip Indian Day School in Brentwood Bay, Victoria. That's what it says on the label. And obviously, like when I searched it up, that school did exist. So this is unfortunately made by a child who attended a day school. And I felt it was really important to bring this out and show it because this represents Canada, not just Canada's history, because that would imply that the trauma and oppression Indigenous people face are in the past. It's not. And I wanted to pay respect to it in the way that I know how. But yeah, this is made by John Cooper. He was 14 when he made this. And this was likely sold. It's unclear if he would have received the funds for this, likely not. And yeah, this is a representation of Canada and the harm they've caused to Indigenous people and continue to.
I like the part of the story where you're like really focusing on, the sticker and really trying to find out where this came from. I think the bottom one right beside where the sticker is it looks like a whale, which is quite beautiful. So obviously to any of our, any of our listeners or viewers, if you know John Cooper who went to this school, you can get in touch with the MCML. If you want to talk about that or comment on that, please feel free to do so. And we do have another piece that's made by a child. Andrea, before we, do you want to do a comment on the house post before we leave it?
I think I just want to say that it's really important to do this research and to determine the actual history. It's not a good part of our history, but it is part of our history, and having the accurate information is really important. And so I'm not exactly sure how the name change happened. The sticker is very deteriorated. And it could be one of those things where the donor said that's where it came from, so that's what got written down. And so, spending the time is really important, because that's the only way we can, reclaim the history. And so I think that's all I need to say about it at this point. I guess one of the other thing is I'd always shied away from really using this piece for anything, recognizing that it was in the collection, but that's not the right way to go either, because it's part of what we do. And there's nothing to be gained from sweeping anything under the rug anymore. You just have to have it out there, and that's the history. So
it's very beautiful. The animals on it are very cute. I'm just looking at the time, and we're going to move on to our and try to do like 4 objects in just a couple of minutes, but this is so cute. This next piece, who is which is a it's what I shouldn't say anything about it. Neda, can you just talk about it? And also the school where it was which was where it was made.
Yeah, so this actually is from Egypt, and what was written on the records is all correct. So I didn't really have to do too much research aside from just the school itself. So for context, this was made by 9-year-old Sayed Mahmoud from Harania, Egypt. And Harania is a small town located, I believe it's either a town or not a suburb, but a region near Cairo in Egypt. But essentially this was made by a 9-year-old kid who attended the school called Wissel Wissef. It's a weaving school in Egypt, and it is very renowned because so many amazing weavers and artists graduated and attended that school. It's not like it's not a formal school, but it is a school that is open to anybody. And they have classes on how to create your own dyes naturally, as well as how to prepare and the materials and everything else in between. This was created by Wissel Wissef himself, who was a very renowned architect in Egypt, but he stopped doing architecture to dedicate his time in helping younger generations and current generations to connect and to not lose their Egyptian heritage. And a lot of it involves weaving. So this is the medium that Wissel Wissef he chose in order to teach at this school. And yeah, it's really, really cool that it was made by a 9-year-old kid, and it's really good.
Yeah, it's super cute. I like how it's there's some aspects of it that are horizontal and some aspects that are vertical, but not like when you get into the smaller into a more up close view. It's like it's definitely has got a lot of just 3D, elements, not 3D, but like picturesque elements to it, and not so much patterns, but it's definitely a picture, an image, the whole thing. And these droopy little horses in it are so cute.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our last few objects. And so you had talked about sort of we have this object and then the box. And how would you describe those two objects as like a category of being in the collection, because they were not from your interpretation made by BIPoC artists?
Yeah, so there is an wooden inlay, a small box, as well as this sash. Neither of them are BIPoC, and the reason why I chose them is just because if you are an art history or crafts nerd like me, you know that like there isn't technically any original art form, an original art practice, as much as like there is, but there isn't, if that makes sense. It's really hard to just straight out say that this is from there and nowhere, it didn't take inspiration from anywhere else. So the box is like a great example of that. This wooden inlay box, actually I can show an example of it, just 1 second. So this is something that I have in my house.
Oh, it's so
and
similar.
something, yeah.
It's hexagonal, but
so
like a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, they come in so many different shapes and sizes, but essentially the reason why I chose that is there wasn't nothing written about it. Andrea picked it up at the Eckhart Grammaté house when they were closing, I believe. Andrea can clarify that, but so there wasn't really any information. We couldn't ask like the person who purchased it anything about it. So when I saw it, I immediately obviously thought of that. And then I just did a quick like Google image search, and I saw like an exact replica of it on Etsy, and it was from Spain. So I did more digging, and I found that this is from Spain. Like, I'd say pretty definitively, because in Spain for hundreds of years, they had a lot of Moorish rule and influence in so much of their art. So especially southern Spain, and the Moor, they were North African, and a lot of North African art in general is very Islamic. It has a lot of Islamic influence, and that's precisely what you can see here. This was not like, it's clearly a combination of a more simplistic Spanish approach to doing wooden inlay boxes such as these. Wooden inlay boxes found in Muslim countries, and a lot of countries in this region. Not only are they like more detailed, they also use pieces of brass. So that I found that to be very interesting. And I wanted to include this as well as the sash to show that how much of all of our art practices and cultures are so connected just due to history. And so this is a Ukrainian sash. And if anybody is familiar, Métis people have almost like a very, very similar, it's done, the technique to create it is different. And the use of colors and different types of symbolism is more prevalent in Métis sashes, but they use them for the same purposes. It's ceremonial, and it's to keep your clothes up. And it looks very, very similar. And there's no like direct evidence online or in books that talk about specifically Métis and Ukrainian influence in the sash. There is in so many different aspects though. So like a lot of Cree, Métis, Oji Cree beadwork and stuff like that has a lot of Ukrainian influence and vice versa. So I thought that was really important to highlight.
And I'd like to look at the very last slide, which was delightful to me. I just love the subject. Not more than others, but in a suddenly amazing way. So can you describe this object?
Yeah, so again, the little wooden inlay box, I opened that up and it's cute. It's like velveteen. There's a tiny like foggy mirror in there. And then I saw this was closed, so you could only see the wooden part. I found it in there and I was like really confused, but I am a naturally very, I guess you could say investigative, as a nice way of saying nosy. So I took it and I like flipped it up, and it turns out it's a tiny little switchblade. It works as such. It even has hinges, so it's like a tiny miniature switchblade that was found inside the wooden inlay box. It's unclear if they were made together or how it ended up there, but I thought it was so cute.
Does it like flick open? Like, can you like just
Yep.
flick it and then
Well, no, you have to like, it's very small. It's as big as a grain of rice. Like, you have to like maneuver it open, but yeah.
Very cool. It's very beautiful. So that concludes our examination of the objects. There are more. I guess we looked at 7. So there are, 22 more objects in the collection that are amazing to look at. And I just encourage anyone to go down to 329 Cumberland. I think you can make an appointment to see it. Andrea, is it open tonight?
It is open tonight for another 36 minutes. Only open till 8 for First Friday night, but our regular hours are Wednesday through Saturday, noon to 4. So those are open hours. Anyone can come and take a look.
Excellent. And should people bring their mask along?
They should bring their masks along, yes.
So we're just past 7:30. So there were a lot more things that we wanted to have a chance to talk about, such as the ethical idea of ethical returns. I know it's like really sort of, a hot topic internationally. And I know that our own little craft museum and library has their practice is not to have done a whole bunch of international acquisitions. We don't have the MCML going all around the globe looking for things that are nice to try to take them back. But Andrea, can you talk a little bit about ethical returns and the MCML? Is there any intersection between between return of objects that culturally, maybe the museum isn't the best place for them, or like rightful ownership, or is there any intersection to talk about on this topic?
Well, we don't know about our pieces yet. Certainly, return of pieces is happening more and more, where it's mostly with larger institutions, like the British Museum or the Smithsonian, or large museums that have had a really big reach in terms of gathering artifacts from all over the world, and have a long history, that go back even into the 19th century. So there is a lot of that's being considered right now, where pieces were acquired perhaps legally at the time, but maybe not ethically, probably not ethically, and where significant pieces are being returned to the cultures, the communities, the countries where they came from. So with our collection, it certainly didn't grow like some of those large collections. Most of the pieces that came to us that represent BIPoC communities were probably purchased by travelers and then brought to Canada and then donated to our collection. So we have not done any investigation about whether things should be returned. So we're just not at that point at this point. So there's always a lot of things to consider when you're returning. And if you are returning, making sure that it's going back to the right place, the right community, the right culture. And I don't know what else to say. There's a lot of considerations about returning things, and a lot of research has to happen before that goes forward, and making sure that the communities there are ready to accept them.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all the research that you've done so far into this collection. Thanks for talking to us about History Revised, and for sharing all of your personal stories and your professional expertise. So I'll just give a quick shout out and thank you to our sponsors as we are out of time. I didn't mention Collective Broadcast in my first thanking of the sponsors at the beginning of this show, but I'd like to thank Aaron at Collective Broadcast for staffing the slides, organizing the audio and the streaming and the video, doing all the technical tasks that we relied on for this talk. Thanks, Aaron. Thank you also to our funders, the Manitoba Arts Council, the Exchange Biz, the Winnipeg Arts Council. Thanks to the Winnipeg Free Press for sponsorship as well. And thank you to the Manitoba Craft Museum and Library, but Andrea, thanks to you from the MCML, and Neda, thank you so much for talking about your first curated show. It was really wonderful. We haven't had any, we would also like to talk about, there is a video. There's a video from the MCML on the exhibit. So you can, there's a link that's posted in the chat that you can look at. So if anyone wants to see the pieces, all of the pieces that we didn't talk about and the ones that we did, you can go to the video. That is great. We did not get any questions from the chat, but I did not encourage it through the talk, so sorry about that. But thank you very much for all of our viewers. Thanks to Andrea and Neda. And so I wish you a lovely night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for including us in this.
It was my pleasure.